just gotten so expensive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When it first opened, it was like $13 for a book of tickets, and now it's probably like several $100s
Yeah.
for admission, and plus, everything else. I just think it's way overpriced.
Oh,
And
by
some,
the time you factor in plane tickets, hotel, and
well, yeah, but some
all
people, I
the,
mean, they come from other countries. They come bring their family and spend days, and of course, we have various parks to choose from.
yeah.
So, but
I've heard Universal Studios might actually have the better park now.
I would think so. And then they have a new one. They have a couple new ones too, but
Yeah.
I don't know. There's one kind of Harry Potterish. I'm not into that, but
Yeah, I've heard they have the Harry Potter one, and they have like
Epic is a new one. I think it's
yeah,
called.
Epic, something like
Yeah,
that.
I don't
But
get into all that. And then there's SeaWorld and Busch Gardens and all that.
Looking good.
okay.
You good? Okay.
Right when you are.
Okay. So basically, I'm gonna have you kind of tell some mini stories about your story.
Sure.
So when I ask you a question, feel free to kind of rephrase my question into your answer, so it's a complete
Yeah.
thought. Okay. Okay. So if you just start, state your name, your whole title, and spell your last name for me.
Okay. Major David Worley, David Worley.
Great. So tell me about your military story, like when you first enlisted, how long you've been in, and what motivated you to want to enlist in the military.
Yeah, so my story about why I joined the military goes way back. As a matter of fact, people ask me this all the time, like, why did you join the Army? And when did you make that decision? Something soldiers get asked from every now and again. And when I think back on it, I'm like, well, I was really sold on my first pack of Little Green Army Men. So as far back as I can remember, I wanted to be a soldier. And then when I turned 17, I joined the Idaho Army National Guard. And when you turn 17, you can enlist, but you have to have both of your parents have to bless off on it. You can't independently join until you're 18. So, my dad signed, reluctantly got my mom to sign eventually. And kind of funny, my recruiter said, oh, the National Guard hasn't been deployed to war since World War II. It's part of his selling point. And then like a year later, we got activated to go to Iraq. So
Did you go?
yes, I did my first deployment to Iraq as an enlisted soldier in 2004. So that was my, first experience overseas with the Army. Came back from that and, did some college. And then eventually I moved out to go to school in Virginia. And there I commissioned through the Virginia National Guard as an infantry officer and did another deployment to Iraq and as an infantry platoon leader. And then eventually, came home from that and continued to serve in the Virginia Guard and did a mix of time as a, drilling guardsman 1 weekend a month and also did a lot of time on active duty orders of various types. Deployed again to the Middle East as a company commander. And then eventually, thought, well, I've kind of spent a lot of time away from home. My wife and I are both from Idaho. So found a job with the Wyoming Guard and then eventually found a job with the Idaho National Guard back in my hometown in Pocatello, Idaho. And that kind of what brought me back full circle back to the Idaho Guard and where kind of this whole story ends up beginning. But
So you've been in for a total of how many years then?
oh, now it's been over 22 now.
So what does it mean to you to serve our country in the military?
So like I said, from a very young age, I wanted to be a soldier, but my sense of patriotism kind of developed alongside that. Just learning about our nation's history, what we stood for. And it's also very much tied to my faith as well, believing that, good men have responsibility to lead when they can, and that part of being a Christian is being willing to sacrifice yourself for others. And so that all kind of gets wrapped up together in what I think it means to be a soldier. And it's been a very important part of my life.
So what does it mean to you to be a Christian? Tell me about your faith.
So like a lot of people, I was raised going to church, reading the scriptures, but like a lot of people, it didn't really sink in. And then my early 20s, I had an experience where I fully understood, through the book of Romans, that I was a sinner and I had done things that permanently separated me from my God, and that unless I turned to Christ, that I could not be saved in his kingdom and I'd be punished for what I'd done. And really, like I said, it's one thing to be raised a Christian, it's another thing to actually become one. And then I actually, for the first time in my life, realized that Christ is real, that he has the power to forgive, the power to save, and I put my faith and trust in him. And from that point forward, it really kind of shaped the rest of my life. I'd already been in the military for a few years, but it changed how I behaved as a soldier, changed, and eventually I commissioned later, but was a huge part about how I led soldiers, trying to be a true servant leader to my men. And I think a lot of people sometimes forget that the way the military leadership structure in the United States military works historically has been a very Christian-based leadership style. Many parts of the world, I visited the officer corps specifically, kind of lords over the troops and, doesn't really want to get their hands dirty and human life is cheap. Whereas the military in its highest, most virtuous form of leadership in the United States military tradition, the officers eat last. An infantry officer is supposed to be at the decisive point of the battle to put the needs of his soldiers ahead of his own. So there's a really strong Christian ethic in how military leadership in America has developed over time that matches America's historic Christian background.
So how did you feel as a Christian? How did you feel responsible to exude your faith as an officer in the military?
So I think as an officer, when you're a Christian, one of the most important things you can do is to be just. So, specifically different positions you might hold, like when I was a company commander, when you have command authority in the military, you have a kind of a unique position that doesn't really exist in the civilian world, where for certain types of crimes, you get to be the judge, the jury, and the executioner under military law, so to speak. So, I've dealt with soldier discipline issues that can be handled at the company commander level, and of various types, some judicial, some non-judicial. And one of the best ways I think you can be a good example of what it means to be a Christian is to be just in your dealings with your subordinates, to give them the proper rewards and recognition they deserve, and also, when necessary, the punishment that the law and the regulations of the military demands.
Okay, so there was an instance where, excuse me, you had shared some personal views and someone took offense to that. Kind of share with me how you led up to share the views on your public social media, I think it was, right?
Yeah,
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so how, I guess you said the controversy started is in the National Guard. It's unique compared to the active duty force, where the active duty has a lot of tight controls on political activity. The National Guard has some similar controls. So when I'm in uniform, I represent the United States military. I don't talk about, if I have critiques of the President of the United States, I don't say anything like that, because I'm operating under very similar restrictions that an active duty soldier would operate under. However, when you're in the National Guard and you're not on orders and you're in a regular drilling status during 1 weekend a month, when you're not at drill, you have the exact same rights and privileges as a regular citizen when it comes to political activity. You're even allowed to run for public office. So I ran for mayor of my town in Pocatello, and then after that, close. I had a runoff race, but not quite there. The town hadn't had a runoff race in 25 years. But I go and have a second campaign for state senate, another close race. And during that Senate campaign, I was very open on social media as part of my campaign on where I stood on Christian morality, specifically with issues that were being contested at the time in the 2022 cycle. things like transgender surgeries. I was very clear that these are immoral, they shouldn't happen, and especially when we're talking about children, that children should not be mutilated in this way, and that should be banned. I was also very clear on issues that were also being talked about at the time, like the drag queen story hours. You know, under no circumstances should we ever expose children to sexually deviant behavior. It's immoral to do so. And beyond that, it's even worse when the state quasi-endorses it by using public facilities that are paid for by the taxpayer dollars, because that becomes a de facto endorsement of immoral behavior. So firmly oppose that, oppose pornography in the libraries. You know, just a lot of these things that are sexual ethics that used to be commonly agreed upon in America, that are Christian-based, and I was just very open that these things shouldn't be allowed, and made that part of my campaign. And again, didn't succeed, unfortunately, didn't win that Senate race, but went back onto orders with the Army, got another job to be with a recruiting battalion as a company commander. And shortly after I took that position, a soldier in my company lodged a complaint against me under the Equal Opportunity Office of the military for our state. And the accusation was basically that he thought that he was going to experience a hostile work environment. And he feared that I would discriminate against him because of my religious and political beliefs.
And did he, I'm here to type. Did he personally, like, read your post somewhere?
So this took a long time to find out eventually. When the investigation was concluded, we kind of got to see what the evidence was, the evidence against me for what I'd done. Basically, he looked me up online. And when you run for office, you end up developing an online footprint. You know, I mean, I had Facebook posts, there were articles in the newspaper that were written about me, you know, various political commentary about my race and different things like that. So I have a public persona. You know, when you run for office, you end up with an online footprint, and that's normal. And he looked it up, and just based on that, decided to file the complaint. Now, I think that's significant is because he didn't actually accuse me of doing anything to him. I wasn't even accused of discriminating against him. It was that he was concerned that I might do this in the future just based on my beliefs.
So talk about the interaction you've had with this individual. Was there conversation or anything that might?
So that was the other thing that was fascinating is that in terms of interactions I had with them, I had really only had two. So we were in a meeting, and he was in another group of NCOs, and I was just kind of getting a feel for the unit, and I offered, you know, was looking for feedback from my subordinates, just kind of outlined some thoughts I had, and he didn't say anything to me, I didn't say anything to him, so just a very limited interaction in a meeting. Shook his hand, I think, and then another occasion, I think I said good morning to him passing in the hall. So one of the reasons I was really surprised by this was because I basically had no interaction with him. And I'd only been in command for 6 days. So I really didn't have any opportunity to take any official action against him, do anything, and didn't have any interactions with him where I could have even said anything negative to him. And the important thing about this whole incident is the way my chain of command reacted. The soldier is really somewhat immaterial. You know, soldiers file false complaints all the time. They make allegations that don't have any basis. The military deals with this all the time in various different ways. What was different here is that my chain of command, instead of looking at the claim and being like, there's nothing here, there's no accusation that Major Worley has, you know, broken any regulations, engaged in any misconduct or anything like that. Instead, they treat the allegations very seriously. Immediately, I was told that I couldn't drill the unit that I just barely taken command of. Shortly after that, I was, you know, administratively removed from command. And then shortly after that, they pressured me to resign. So I was actually pulled into an office with my battalion commander, and I was told that, I had violated regulations and all these things wrong, and that my military career would be ruined unless I resigned.
With no evidence of any complaint.
Well, that was the other thing too. When I asked, what regulations have I violated? What's the charge? It was vague. It varied between vague to we don't have to tell you in this interaction. And then at one point I even said, hey, well, I need to consult a lawyer before I do anything. And I was denied my right to counsel. I said, no, I wasn't allowed to leave the room, make a phone call, or do anything. Now, later on, they walked all this back when the JAG office formally got involved, and the explanation was that my commander didn't understand the instructions that he was given. And I don't know if that's true or not. I can only take them at their word. But the point is that this spiraled out of control very quickly. And eventually the result is that, I said, well, eventually the result is we're going to have the investigation, which is the formal process, and we'll trust the process and see what comes out of it. Well, this process dragged on for months, almost a year. And during this time, I wasn't allowed to drill the unit. I didn't really have any formal duties and responsibilities assigned to me. I had some that were temporary and very limited. But basically it was I was ostracized from the force. And
now, are you still serving in the National Guard?
I'm still in the National Guard right now.
You're just not in command?
No, I'm not in a command position. So removed from command, which was a huge blow in the military, especially for an officer. Basically your career is toast at that point for being removed from command. And so kind of put into a limbo while the investigation's going on, and eventually get the results of the investigation. And along this whole way, Liberty Counsel was representing me, and also a private legal group, private lawyer, Davis Younce. And also we had, the military's legal representation, the JAG Corps, is also providing some representation as well. So we're having some back and forth with my chain of command. But overall, we're trying to trust the process, and let's do the investigation, and let's see what comes out of it. Well, the conclusions by the investigating officer are the most fascinating part about this whole thing, and kind of really expose what was really going on. So you have to remember, this whole thing started in 2023, so the Biden administration is still in power. The cultural zeitgeist is kind of the LGBTQ movement cannot be defeated, all that type of stuff. It's a march of history type thing. Well, the conclusion of the investigation is not to say that I had violated some specific regulation, like they can't say, Major Worley did this, Major Worley did that, or these are the actions that I took that would lead to me being removed from command. The main thrust of the conclusion of the investigation was that the problem with me being in command was my religious and my political beliefs. That was the main issue.
And they brought that up.
And they brought that up specifically in the conclusion of the investigation.
How they specifically.
So that was listed in the investigating officer's report.
What was listed? Tell me how they specifically pinpointed that.
Well, basically what they said is that I was a religious extremist. That my political and religious beliefs were really the issue and rendered me unfit for command. And to the extent that he said that the chain of command should consider referring me to the Insider Threat Program. And just what the Insider Threat Program is, that's a program in the military to try and get rid of people like jihadists. So when they say you're a religious extremist, we have to remember that this whole infrastructure they built with this term, when they try and apply it to Christians, this is not just throwing out a label that has no meaning. When they tell you you're a religious extremist, you're a political extremist, what they're doing is trying to put you in a category that's akin to people like Al-Qaeda. So, one of the recommendations was that they look at perhaps maybe my case needs to be referred to the Insider Threat Program, because I obviously have animosity and hostility towards homosexuals and LGBTQ people because of my religious beliefs, because I'm a religious extremist. So there's various ways that this was alluded to or explicitly stated in the report. And then the other thing that was shocking in there was another recommendation from the investigating officer was that the Idaho National Guard perhaps establish a program or a procedure that whenever someone is being selected for a prominent position in the military command or a something in recruiting or something that's a public-facing position, that the Idaho Guard do a scrub of that person's social media and their whatever they can find out about them on the internet to make sure that they don't have similar views. So let's go to the root of this. Is the accusation is Major Worley might discriminate against me because he believes that my lifestyle is immoral. He believes my lifestyle is immoral because he's a Christian. And then later on they say, well, we need to make sure that we don't allow anybody who has these extremist views take positions of significant authority, and we should have a program to pre-screen people.
Yet you never displayed any evidence that you were discriminating against anyone.
So, well, by their definition. So, but this is not even discrimination. This is saying we don't want people in command who believe in traditional Christian morality or have put anything out in public that would indicate that. And that's where this becomes clear that the real issue here, it's not something that I did. This is, we don't like what this man believes. And we actually would prefer that we keep people like him, Christians who believe in traditional Christian morality, traditional sexual ethics, biblical sexual ethics. We don't want people like that in leadership. And that's what came out of the investigating officer's report.
So Liberty Counsel has filed a lawsuit on your behalf, and I'm curious, are there not other Christians in command in this particular National Guard?
Sure, but this is always the way, I mean, it's a shame how this works, but...
Are they just stay silent about it?
Sure, I mean, this is the thing. There are a lot of people, unfortunately, some of the people involved in this whole mess, people in my chain of command, I know that they are men who go to church, and they are men who claim to have the same beliefs I have, but they're willing to participate in this process because the overall mentality of the military, especially under Biden's administration, has been building over years, is an anti-Christian bias. So yes, they know there's other Christians out there, but they don't want you to be publicly Christian. They don't want you to publicly support Christian morality. So, we've really actually turned the world upside down here. They're fine with you being a closet Christian, and they're fine with you conforming to the regime's talking points at the time, but they don't want you to actually be a vocal Christian. And I think some of them in military leadership, depending on which echelon you're talking about, would prefer there weren't Christians in leadership positions at all. Some of these people are very anti-Christian who are in our military leadership structure, unfortunately.
No, let's go to the other extreme though. What about those like this particular person who advocates LGBT ideology? Are they vocal about their beliefs, or did this just come up because he filed a complaint against you?
So I don't know that the soldier who filed the complaint I don't know how active he is in that community.
Or are there not those in command?
Sure, but this is actually what's happened in the military though, is if the situation were reversed, I think is a better way to answer your question. Mm-hmm. If I was under the command of an open LGBTQ advocate of some type, who had publicly advocated for LGBTQ causes, and if I had filed a similar complaint, I think that this person's going to discriminate against me based on my religion because my religion conflicts with what he believes is morally okay. There is absolutely no way that my complaint would have been taken seriously. And it shouldn't have, because he filed a complaint based on a hypothetical anyway. But there's no way that would have been taken seriously. And if anything, even if there was some basis for my complaint, even if I actually experienced discrimination of some type, there's a serious possibility that I would have been punished for filing the complaint. I don't think people realize how much the military changed over Biden's administration and how much things have been trying to be pushed back the other way. But things changed radically in the military, and yeah, if you're advocating for LGBTQ stuff, you're not going to be punished.
Well, what about now? Are you seeing a change under Commander President Trump and Secretary Hegseth? Are you seeing, because we're publicly seeing, Christ, they had a worship service. They are advocating. He's leading prayer. Are you seeing a change within your
So
what do you call
I
it,
think my unit. So
yeah.
I think definitely across the entire military, there's been a lot of shifting away from some of the radical left-wing ideology that was being pushed under Biden's administration. However, I think that what people need to realize is, to borrow a phrase from people who critique from the other side, but systemic problems require systemic solutions. And we had a long period of time where these policies were implemented, and a lot of people who believe in those ideologies that are harmful to the military and harmful to our country were allowed to move into positions of authority and leadership. And most of those people are still there. And that's across the military as a whole. Most of those people are still in positions of power and authority.
Those who are advocating Biden's policies and all that, they're still in power.
Oh yeah, yeah. So for example, and this is the other thing too, the incentive structure has to change. So no one is ever punished for harassing Christians or conservatives. That just doesn't happen. You look at all the COVID stuff. Who's paid the price for all the COVID discrimination? We're having trouble getting those people's careers restored. So this goes to the fundamental problem that you can change policies at the top, you can have new leadership at the top, but until those policy changes have you rotated in new personnel, because personnel is policy. If someone doesn't believe in the policy, they'll just slow roll it, won't let it happen. We're seeing with COVID. With my case, you would have thought with the changeover of the administration, the complete change in the attitude towards religious freedom in the military, that I would have been made whole immediately. That wasn't what happened. As a matter of fact, just recently, I'm told that I'm still going to get a negative evaluation for being removed from command, even though the whole rationale for my removal was spurious. Still trying to use another flimsy justification for why I was removed, trying to bypass their original justification, provide a new justification. So this is still going on. It's still actively happening in the military, and the people who push these things, none of them have been removed from their positions. No one has been punished for what happened during COVID. And so things aren't going to change until that happens.
Wow.
And that's part of the point of the lawsuit, is bringing this to the public awareness that this not only happened in the military, but to a certain extent is still happening in the military.
Yeah, it's been very disappointing. And as well as you're serving under Governor Brad Little, I think that was also disappointing because he's notoriously conservative and all
Yeah,
that.
he's a Republican in Idaho, and Idaho is a conservative
So what does that mean
state.
to you? Your governor and these other generals have not been speaking out on your behalf and doing something, even responding.
Yeah, so that was very disappointing. And I think that this goes also to, I can't guess at the motivations of the governor or the generals exactly. But what I can say is that because of my position, being in the recruiting battalion, the recruiting battalion reports directly to the assistant adjutant general, and because recruiting is such a high-profile activity for the National Guard, keeping our numbers up is a very important thing, and it's a very public-facing entity. It has direct oversight from the highest-ranking officers in the Idaho National Guard, from the TAG and the ATAG, the adjutant general and his assistant, so the 2-star and the 1-star. And unfortunately, what happened to me crossed over 4 general officers. So when my case started to where it is today, the top 2 officers in the state rotated out. And the same policy of discrimination continued under this tag and his predecessor. This tag's Assistant Adjutant General and his predecessor. So we're talking about 4 general officers who've continued this policy in some way, shape, or form.
So none of them have been motivated to do the right thing and change?
No. And what that shows is that this is also a very, again, high-level case. We're talking about a federal lawsuit, media inquiries. This isn't something that occurred, 5 echelons down in the bureaucracy where people didn't know about it. The people who our lawyers have been going back and forth with are the state-level JAG officers. So again, we're not talking about some brigade lawyer out there doing his own thing. And so the only thing I can conclude is that for whatever reason, this is what the senior leadership wants, because they've had many opportunities to take an off-ramp, to reverse course, and they've had all the political incentives to do so. I have no idea why, if you're a Republican governor in a Republican state, you wouldn't want to take the opportunity to show your conservative bona fides and say, aha, I'm the commander-in-chief. No, we're not going to do that woke stuff in my state. I don't know why you would do that, why you wouldn't do that if you're a Republican governor. And unless our generals have some other incentive, I don't know why they wanted to keep dragging this out either, unless they're ideologically committed to it or that's the pressure they're getting from their superiors.
Yeah, I mean, this has been 2 years now, right?
It's been over 2 years, yeah.
So that's been, I think, the most disappointing, because we thought, oh, Governor Little, he's generally, he's conservative. He's certainly going to do the
Yeah,
right thing.
certainly hears about the case, he'll do something. And the other thing that's disappointing, and I think that this is something that sometimes we forget about the National Guard, is that the National Guard truly is, and it's a organization that their commander-in-chief is the governor, but when we're activated, we serve under the president. So it's kind of this shared entity between the federal government and the states. But a lot of times, states try and pretend like they don't have the power to fix these things. But we saw the difference in some states during COVID said, no, we're not going to enforce the mandate. We're not going to do that. And some governors exercised their powers as the commander-in-chief of their guard units to actually give orders. But a lot of governors, unfortunately, whether it's a lack of education or motivation, I don't know, can't guess the motives, but they will hide behind the Department of Defense, now the Department of War, and say, oh, we're just doing what DOD wants done. And in my case in particular, I was told multiple times that, no, the governor's not going to do anything because this is a military DOD internal matter. Well, no, it's not. I'm one of his officers. This is his National Guard. These are his troops. He has the power. But he refused to intervene. So exactly why, I don't know. I can only speculate.
So it sounds like the no Christians in command policy seems to only apply to you at this point, unless someone else speaks up.
So just to be clear about that, they knew that they had stepped in it because we filed a counter to the Iowa report, give a response, and they realized that that was a very dangerous thing to put in print. They kind of exposed the game there. And so they tried to walk that back, but didn't say they wouldn't do it. They just said, oh, but that's going to require further review. But in the next round of conclusions from the report, that wasn't pushed. But the point is that the idea that you would have a senior officer in the military who's an investigative officer under the oversight of multiple generals and a state JAG officer, that all these guys look at this and say, oh, this is even something we should consider doing. I mean, that's ridiculous. It flies in the face of the First Amendment. It flies in the face of our military tradition. It flies in the face of all of our legal traditions. This idea that you would actually pre-screen people to ensure they don't hold traditional Judeo-Christian values. They don't hold Christian values on moral issues. Got to screen those people out and make sure they're not in command positions. I mean, that's insane. And you'd think that wouldn't even be possible, but it happened.
Oh, I mean, our founders were, Judeo-Christian foundation to defend this country, to defend our religious freedom. And so they're saying, no, we don't want those people in command that would uphold that.
Yep.
Makes no sense.
No. But yeah, that was on the table. And here's the other thing about why personnel is policy and not just what's on paper. What is done doesn't have to necessarily match what's in the rule book. So it would not surprise me, again, I can't prove this, but it would not surprise me that if you're being selected for any position of significant responsibility, that now there is a scrub of your social media that happens. There doesn't have to be an official policy to do that. It just has to be something that's done internally. And this goes back to why it's not enough to write a memo at the Pentagon to change what happens inside the military. There has to be accountability for people who violated the rights of their officers and the soldiers under their command.
So what do you hope to see happen?
So at a minimum, I think that, I want my military career fully restored. And that still hasn't happened yet. And it may not even be possible at this point. But I'll leave it to the courts to decide, but there needs to be, and if not the courts, there needs to be some consequences from the Secretary of War or from the governor, but there needs to be some way to hold these people accountable where the incentive structure is reversed, that if you discriminate against Christians, there will be consequences to your career, consequences to your agency. I can't mete out these types of punishments, but there needs to be some form of consequences to ensure this doesn't happen in the future.
Would you, I don't know how old your children are, but would you encourage them if one of them was interested in joining the military at this point? Would you encourage them to do so?
So I have 5 children, 2 sons. One of them is already very interested in the military. And it breaks my heart, but I would have reservations, unfortunately, with the way the military operates right now. But that's one of the reasons why I'm pursuing this case. I mean, I've had multiple off-ramps too. I have over 20 years of service. I could have just retired and said, I don't want to deal with this mess. And unfortunately, I know other good officers and NCOs who've done that over the years, who got tired of the destruction of the warfighting culture in the military and just left. Even guys who left who didn't have retirement just said, I don't want to deal with this anymore. This isn't the Army I joined, and I don't want to participate anymore. I'm not interested in being a part of whatever this is. But one of the reasons I am fighting is because I want our military to be returned to what it was, and that is an honorable profession that protects the rights of the American people, that is focused on being prepared to defeat the enemies of the United States if called upon to do so. And I hope that that happens so that my sons can serve like I did.
And it takes a brave person like you to be able to speak up and fight. That's what it takes. Now tell me how you came across and came in relation with Liberty Counsel and what Liberty Counsel has done on your behalf in this case.
Yeah, so how I came across Liberty Counsel, it's kind of a long story, but when I was in the Virginia Guard, I did some time in Northern Virginia, living up there, but spent almost my entire time in the Virginia Guards attached to a unit in Southern Virginia and actually in Lynchburg. So 1st Battalion, 1st of the 116th. And I moved down to Southern Virginia and I did my platoon leader time, my company command time, multiple staff positions with the National Guard Battalion based in Lynchburg there. And at one point, when I was a battalion staff officer, I actually had a lieutenant under my command whose brother is a lawyer for Liberty Counsel. So I got to meet Richard and, work with him on various political projects. We both supported the Second Amendment, big supporters of gun rights. And there were some political controversies that happened in Virginia while I lived there, that I worked with him on some of these projects to try and protect gun rights in Virginia. And so got to learn about Richard and kind of what Liberty Counsel does, kind of just through him and his brother. And I had no idea that that relationship would be so important later on. And so when this happened to me in the Idaho Guard, years after I left the Virginia Guard, I thought, well, I know who I need to call. I need to call Richard. He'll know what to do. And immediately he said he would start representing me. And since then, it's really been Liberty Counsel combined with Davis Younts, again, another military lawyer. He specializes in military law, formerly a JAG officer, but does a lot of work in this space. Has done a lot of great work with COVID stuff. And really the whole way advises me on how to proceed, providing legal assistance, legal advice, drafting responses to the military's lawyers. And the whole time, I mean, just providing not just the direct legal support, but also the true moral support that you need in a fight like this. And it's always good to have other Christian brothers you can work with when you're in a bind. And they're truly, you know, like spiritual brothers in arms in the foxhole and trying to do the right thing. And it's just been I couldn't have asked for a better experience as far as that goes. And of course, Liberty Counsel is a nonprofit. So this is something that I think a lot of people forget sometimes, is if you have any legal problem with the government has unlimited money. You know, their lawyers, their resources they spend, you cannot, as a private citizen, usually have any chance of getting anything done. Just the costs will bury most people. And it was a huge blessing that Liberty Counsel provided these services free of charge. I know they're not free, but free to me anyway. And that really made it possible. Because the other thing that this type of discrimination, when the government does things like this, you know, this is a direct threat to my livelihood. And if I did not have Liberty Counsel, I probably would have lost my job immediately. And I had bought a house based on getting this job, made a lot of financial decisions and moves, turned down other job opportunities to take this position. So it was a huge blessing to my family, not only to have support in the legal fight, but literally saved my family from financial ruin. So it was a huge blessing on a whole bunch of fronts. And it was, again, great friendship, but I had no idea how important it would be in my life.
Well, we're proud to do it. I was just going to ask you that question, but you already answered it about, or maybe I'll ask you in a different way. Paint the picture for me, sort of in a nutshell, a couple sentences of how you would paint a picture of if Liberty Counsel had not been in the picture for you, what you would foresee.
Yeah, so I think that if I didn't have Liberty Counsel in the picture during all this, one, I'm not sure I would have been able to take on the challenge at all, just because I knew how much lawyers cost, and I've unfortunately seen how the government can dig in its heels, and a protracted legal battle would just be something I couldn't afford. So I probably wouldn't be able to take on the fight at all, but I certainly would have lost my job. And it's kind of weird. This in and of itself, I think, is an admission of guilt, unfortunately, from the military. I've been on the other side of letting people go who violated the law or violated military regulations. I have terminated people from permanent positions for violating military law, for abusing resources, for fraud, waste, and abuse type stuff. And if you have the goods on somebody, you let them go. You cut their orders and you send them on their way. I was basically had minimal to zero responsibilities for nearly 2 years. And they kept me through my entire full length of orders without really having me do anything. You do that when you're trying to hide something and you're trying to make somebody go away. If I'd actually done something that violated the law, violated military regulations, I would have been terminated immediately, with or without legal representation. But because I had Liberty Counsel, we were able to make the case, even through these convoluted processes I was put through, that it was the military and not myself that was at fault in this case. And because of that, I was able to stay on orders, and I didn't lose my house. I wasn't financially ruined, and I was able to weather the storm.
And so what does it mean to you to have Liberty Counsel regarding your religious freedom, your First Amendment rights?
So I think that this is an organization that is absolutely essential, especially in an age where, unfortunately, whether it's popular sentiment or it's the actions of the government itself at times, there's a lot of anti-Christian sentiment out there, whether it's from the state or it's from federal government or it's just from people in private business even. And I think that what Liberty Counsel does, I believe as Christians, we are called to make sacrifices if necessary to honor our Lord. However, it is always a blessing when we can have the tools to fight those battles more effectively. I wasn't going, if they had put something in front of me like, we'll make it all go away if we bring in this guy and you tell him that I actually don't think that sodomy is a sin. I'm sorry. If I could do some way to recant on my religion to save my position, I wouldn't have ever done that. You have to stand for truth and righteousness. You have to stand for Christ. That's non-negotiable. But what a blessing is it to be able to take that stand and at the same time know that you have a chance of winning. You have a chance of winning in the courts. You have a chance of persuading people by having the public battle. You don't have to lose your house. You don't have to ruin your finances. That's a huge blessing. If I'm called upon to do those things, I will give anything for my God. But if we have the means to fight, and I don't have to impoverish my family, that's a huge blessing. And that's what Liberty Counsel is.
Very good. Thank you. Anything else comes to mind?
No, not really.
That was excellent. Can I just pray for you?
Sure.
Thank you. Father, thank you so much for David. Thank you for his family. Thank you for his faith, that he is willing to serve you no matter the cost. Thank you for the privilege to come alongside him, represent him. And I just pray, you are a God of justice. I pray for the end result to be favorable. I pray for eyes and hearts to be open in this situation, Lord, and I pray that we continue to get the word out and that it will reach all the way to the top to Secretary Hegseth and President Trump, and they will see the injustice that's going on here and restore Major Worley to his appropriate position, Lord. And I just thank you for what you're going to do. We want to give you all the credit and the glory in that situation. Thank you for his family that has been standing with him, supporting him through all of this, Lord, that he is the brave David in all of this, in so many ways in this battle, Lord. And I just pray blessing upon them as a result, Lord. Thank you in the name of Yeshua. Amen.
Amen.
I'm excited.